For you people that know anything about that village over there about 5 miles, and I got to visit about once every 10 days just to get back to it. That's New Miami. And Kokata had the name of New Miami before it came New Miami. And so we just call ourselves Kokata, and people ask me, well, how many you got in your group? I said, don't know. It just depends on who shows up on a particular. What you see is what you get. I was reading in Psalms years ago, 33rd Psalm. I got to read that and I thought, man, this describes our group. It starts out, you know, it says, sing joyfully to the Lord. Well, we do that. And it says, praise him with the harp. Doug's got a harp over there. And then it says, make music to him with the 10-string lute. Well, lute's, you know, like a guitar, and Steve's over there got one, Mitch got one, I got one. Then it says, sing a new song. We try to do that. Then it says, shout for joy. And, amen, we like to do that. But then I got to the part and I thought, King David, you have never heard this group because it says play skillfully. We're just going to sing one that's everybody's favorite. And we might not be able to play skillfully. You might not think you can't sing skillfully. But you can sure sing along. Something glad more than when this life is over. God's celestial shore. I fly away, yes, here. I fly away, oh glory. I fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by. I fly away,
deep chapter. So what I want to do, maybe you weren't here last week, I want to review just a little bit before we go on into this chapter, because it kind of ties everything in. But last week we talked about, in verses 1 through 10, how sorrow is better than laughter. And what Solomon was saying there was, he says, looking back is better than looking forward. And what he meant was, if we live a life that has meaning, and we live a life that is productive, and we live a life with God the way that we should live, then we have built our legacy in life. And when we die, there's no chance of us losing that legacy at all. And that's better than being born into this world and starting all over. And that's what Solomon was saying. He also said that learning from mourning is easier than learning from feasting. Sometimes in our lives, the hardships of our lives, the things that cause us to be sorrowful, the things that cause us to hurt inside, is better than living life all the time on the mountaintop. And someone said to me after the service, they said, you know, life in the valleys make us stronger than a life on the mountaintop. And that is so true. Then we looked at rebuke is better than praise. And we won't go all into that, but we talked about verse 5, where it says, it is better to hear the rebuke of the wise. Verse 6, for like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of a fool is also vanity. Now, when we are rebuked for something that we've done, we are prone to resist it or resent it or even return it to those that have given it to us. But Solomon puts a whole new spin on it here in Ecclesiastes when he tells us that rebuke from a wise man is far better than the praise of a fool. In fact, he likens the praise of a fool like as to crackling of thorns. And in the Palestinian times, they would go out, and those that were in Palestine would understand what Solomon was saying here and what he was comparing it to. And if they needed a short little burn, they wanted to warm something up real quickly. In a moment, they would put thorns underneath that pot and fire them up, and they would let those thorns burn out. But in that process, those thorns would be crackling and popping and everything else. And that's what Solomon is comparing that to. As we talked about, he's saying someone who constantly builds you up and gives you praise and all of that. Sometimes, after a while, it sounds like that crackling and popping sound. So, we talked about that, we heard of that. And then he went on to say the hard way is better than the easier way. That's why shortcuts is never a good answer. And what he said in verse 7, he says, surely oppression destroys a wise man's reasons, and a bribe debases the heart. In verse 8, he says, the end of the thing is better than the beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud spirit. Verse 9, he says, do not hasten in your spirit it to be angry, for angry rests in the bosom of fools. Now, what he's saying there was to bribe someone. What is that? That's a shortcut. It's a shortcut to get your own way. But it will always be the hard way, and it will corrupt your integrity. It will destroy the purity of your heart. And Solomon says we're better off to be patient in our spirit than to be proud in our spirit. These are things that we covered last week, maybe not as in depth as we could have, but we need to take things into our own hands. If we take things in our own hands, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. So the end of the thing is better than the beginning. In other words, as I said last week, we look at the end of things when we're coming to choices in life. Where is this going to lead me? Where is this going to take me? What is the result of this action? Where is it? We're looking ahead instead of looking at the now. Remember, as I said last week, God always saves his best for last. But Satan always front loads his best. And then it's downhill from there, from that point on. And that's true in life. And the last thing we talk about is today is better than yesterday. And that's verse 10. We hear people say the good old days. Well, so many of us forget that even back in the good old days, there were problems. And there were concerns. And there was heartaches. And there was fears. And there was pain. And what Solomon is saying is don't live in the past. It doesn't exist anymore. The past doesn't exist anymore. You find the glory of God in the valley, and you don't find it always on the mountaintops. You forget how you got to that mountaintop sometimes when we constantly stay on the mountaintops. So God has to take us into the valleys. And that's why he gives us those things. Here's the thing I discovered that leads us into where we want to go today. Romans 8:28 says this. That we know, and we know, you see those words right there? We know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. There are things in life that we can know. And the Bible tells us that. We know that all these things in our lives, the good and the bad, work out for our good. Now, while we're going through it, maybe we don't understand, but after everything settles down, we can look back and we know why we went through what we went through, the good and the bad. So we can know that. And then he says in Romans 8:22, we know that this isn't the way that life is. We know it's going to get better. Okay? That's what he says there. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pains together until now. So it's not something else that we know. We can know those things. But Romans 8:22 says this. And if you look at it, or 25, I'm sorry, or 26, 8:26. Likewise, the Spirit also helps us in our weaknesses. For what, church? We do not know what we should pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. So there are things in our life that we can know, and there are things in our life that we won't know. And we will never know until the day we can stand before God. And if he chooses to, he will give us those answers that we so have longed to know. But I think once we get to heaven, those things are going to pass, and they're not even going to be in our concerns. The presence of God will be in our concerns. So let's remember this going into this part of chapter 7. And this is our main thing that we need to keep in our minds, and that is God's plan is good. God's plan is good, and we know that. God's plan is good, and we know that. God's purpose is clear, and we know that. God's plan is good, we know that. And God's purpose is clear, and we know that. But his program is mysterious. Isn't it? We don't always know that. So sometimes we don't know what to pray. We don't know what to say. Does that change the fact that God's plan is good? Absolutely not. God's plan is good, and we know that. We know he's working on things together for our good. We know that someday we're already, right now, we that know Christ in our lives, we're already sanctified. Amen? We're already sanctified, we're justified, and thank God one day, when we fly away, we will be glorified. Amen. All of those things are going to, but he's still in charge, but we don't understand all the things, why he does it the way he does, or why he chooses to do it the way he does. We can know certain things, but we're not always. And that's why that great old hymn, if you remember, I'll understand it better by and by. Because right now we don't. We can know some things, but there are also some things that we don't know. And we just need to leave that up to God. So that leads us into what we have before us today in the remaining time that we have. All right? And that's what we're going to get to. So we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. We're looking at verses 11 through 29. And I want to start reading today. I want to bring this together of what we discussed last week with this. I was trying to figure out how in the world am I going to do this. And then I remember that I read this years ago out at Dartown. And it's a great fable, it's a great story that Max Lucado brought out in one of his books. And I want to read this to you, okay? It is basically in this, we're talking about this fable of the woodcutter's wisdom. You can look it up and you can read it yourself, but it's called The Woodcutter's Wisdom. And this is how it goes. Once there was an old man who lived in a tiny village. Although he was poor, he was envied by all. For he owned a beautiful white horse. Even the king coveted his treasure. A horse like this had never been seen before. Such was its splendor, such was its majesty and its strength. People offered fabulous prices for the steed, but the old man always refused. This horse is not a horse to me, he would tell them. It's a person. So how can you sell a person? He's a friend. He's not a possession. How can you sell a friend? The man was poor and the temptation was great, but he never sold the horse. One morning he found that the horse was not in the stable. All the village came to see him, and they said, "You old fool." They scoffed. "We told you that someone would steal your horse. We warned you that you would be robbed. You are so poor. How could you ever hope to protect such a valuable animal? It would have never been better. It would have been better to have sold him. You could have gotten whatever price you wanted. No amount would have been too high. Now the horse is gone, and you've been cursed with a misfortune." The old man responded, "Don't speak too quickly. Say only that the horse is not in the stable. That is all we know. The rest is judgment. If I've been cursed or not, how can you know? How can you judge?" The people contested, and they said, "Don't make us out to be fools. We may not be philosophers, but great philosophy is not needed here. The simple fact that your horse is gone is a curse." The old man spoke again. "All I know is that the stable is empty and the horse is gone. The rest I don't know, whether it be a curse or a blessing. I can't say. All we can see is a fragment. Who can say what will come next?" The people of the village laughed, and they thought that this man was crazy. They had always thought he was a fool, but he wasn't. He would have sold the horse and lived off the money, but instead, he was a poor woodcutter. The old man was still cutting firewood and dragging it out to the forest, and he was selling it out there. He lived hand to mouth in the misery of his poverty. Now how he had proven that he was indeed a fool. After 15 days, the horse returned. He hadn't been stolen. He had run away into the forest. Not only had he returned, but he had brought a dozen wild horses with him. Once again, the village people gathered around the woodcutter and they spoke. "Oh man, you were right. We were wrong. What we thought was a curse actually ended up being a blessing. Please forgive us." The old man responded, "Once again, you go too far, saying only that the horse is back. State only that a dozen horses returned with him, but don't judge. How do you know if this is a blessing or not? You see only a fragment. Unless you know the whole story, how can you judge? You read only one page of a book. Can you judge the whole book? You read only one word of a phrase. Can you understand the entire phrase? Life is so vast, yet you judge all of life with one page or one word. All you have is a fragment. Don't say that this is a blessing. No one knows that. I am content with what I know. I'm not perturbed by what I don't know." Maybe the old man is right, they said one to another. They said a little more. But down deep, they knew he was wrong. They knew it was a blessing. 12 wild horses returned, and hadn't it been for that one horse, they would have never came back. And with a little bit of work, the animals could be broken in and trained and sold for a lot of money. The old man had a son, the only son that he had. The young man began to break the wild horses. After a few days, he fell off one of the horses and he broke both legs. Once again, here come the villagers. They gathered around the old man and they cast their judgments. You were right, they said. You proved you were right. The dozen horses were not a blessing. They were a curse. Your only son has broken his legs, and now you're at an old age. You have no one to help you. Now you are more poor than ever. The old man spoke again. You people are obsessed with judging. Don't go so far as say only that my son broke his legs. Who knows if it is a blessing or a cursing? No one knows. We only have a fragment. Life comes in fragments. It so happened that a few weeks later that the country was engaged in war against the neighboring country. All of the young men of the village were required to join the army. The only one that was not required was the only son of the old man because of his injuries. Once again, the people gathered around the old man crying and screaming because their sons had been taken away. There was a little chance that they would return. The enemy was strong and the war would be a losing struggle. And they knew within their hearts they would never see their sons again. You were right, old man. And they cried. God knows you were right. This proves it. Your son's accident was a blessing. His legs may be broken, but at least he's with you. Our sons have gone off and are gone forever. The old man spoke again, and he said this: it is impossible to talk with you. You always draw conclusions. No one knows, say only this: your sons have gone off to war, and mine did not. No one knows if it was a blessing or a curse. No one is wise enough to know. Only God knows. End of story. The woodcutter in that story has captured the essence of Solomon's words in Ecclesiastes 7. Sometimes crying is better than laughing. Sometimes funerals are better than weddings. Sometimes a man's dying days are better than his birthday. Sometimes criticisms are better than compliments. Sometimes the long way around is better than the shortcut. And we all know that there's no such thing as the good old days. If life is really that upside down, then how in the world can wisdom possibly help you and I in these times? So Solomon is going to teach that wisdom is not knowing what you cannot know. Wisdom is not trying to judge a book by its cover. Wisdom is understanding that you only have a fragment in life. And that fragment might bring you good and it might bring you bad. But only God has the entire manuscript to your life. And how blessed we are with the wisdom of the woodcutter and the wisdom of Solomon that we have before us today. Here now, in the last part of this chapter 7, we're going to discover that there's two gigantic reasons for you and I to have gratitude in our lives. If we have wisdom, we should be thankful for the perspective of wisdom, and we should know the power of wisdom in our life. So let's look at it. First of all, we're going to look through 11 through 18, and that might be the only thing that we get through today. All right? But first of all, we're going to look at that we should thank God for the perspective of wisdom in our lives. Wisdom may not solve all of our problems. It may not make all of the tough things good, but wisdom gives us an understanding of what's going on, and it helps us to see things in perspective. All right? So let's look at verse 11 first, and then we'll look at verse 12. Verse 11 says this: wisdom is good with an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense as money is a defense, but the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. This is what Solomon is saying. And it's better said, Solomon, to have wisdom than to have good fortune or good inheritance. And wisdom does not depreciate, nor is it subject to inflation. And Solomon says that if a person has wisdom and wealth, then they are doubly blessed. In fact, if you look at verse 12 again, it becomes his defense twice over. Wisdom gives life to those who have it. And that is what Solomon said in the Proverbs. If you look at Proverbs 8 in verse 35, he said, for whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. So in essence, what Solomon is saying in Proverbs is wisdom finds life. And according to Solomon, wisdom is like a shelter to those who have it. It's a greater source of security than money could ever be. And it's amazing to me how very few people there are who have both wisdom and wealth. And if we look at it, this is what he's saying. Wealth has become to them a curse instead of a blessing. Solomon says wisdom can give perspective to all of us. Wisdom helps us. Okay? So let's look at this in the way that he wants us to see it. Number 2, wisdom helps us to deal with providence. If you look at verses 13 and 14, look down at or look up on the screen and you'll see it. Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in a day of adversity, consider, surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. These are great words. Solomon is saying right here that the truth of the matter is that affliction is the appointment of God, and it's the crooked things that we can't fix in our lives that we would love to fix if we could. But those are things that we can't fix that God has allowed to happen in our lives. Those are the things that brings us wisdom. Those are the things that teach us the deeper things of God. The more you go through, the closer you can become to God. And the more you become closer to God, the better the way that you look at things in life. And that's what Solomon is saying. He's saying all of this. The providential hand of God in every one of our lives. The Bible says that you and I are uniquely created by God Himself. He's created each and every one of us the way that He created us, and He has providentially placed His hand in our life, and He wants to lead us in the direction that He wants us to go. He wants us to become exactly who He wants us to become in Him. And through that process, through the straight ways of life, and through the bends of the roads in life, He's going to bring you to that point. And He's saying that sometimes those crooked ways in our life are a lot better than the straight ways, because we learn so much through it. And we learn so much through it. Connie Story, who was with us at Darktown, we came over here. She just passed away Friday morning. She passed away. Connie was a beautiful, wonderful person. She was loved by her family. She gave everything she had to her family, to her friends. She loved coming to this church. Her husband hasn't really been that supportive in Connie's coming to church, but Connie kept coming. And she'd always pray, and she'd always tell me, going out the door, Pastor, keep praying for Mike, keep praying for Mike. And I've I've always kept that in my prayers because I know that was a desire of Connie's heart. When Leslie and I went there Thursday to go visit the family because they called hospice in and she wasn't doing too good, we were able to talk to the family. Mike wasn't there. I really didn't know how this was going to go because I know the family has not been involved in church or involved with God or anything like that. But as we gathered to pray at the end, we prayed. And then this week, I think it was Friday evening or Saturday morning, I can't remember, but I got a call from, it was Friday evening. I got a call from the family and they want to have the church, they want to have her funeral right here at our church. I thought that was awesome. I think that's awesome. But I was asked a question while I was there at the hospital. Why does God allow these things to happen to good people? Why does He allow someone to have cancer? Why does He heal some people from cancer, but He chooses not to heal others from cancer when they pass away? Why does that happen? Why does God allow these things to happen? And I went back to what I've been studying here in Ecclesiastes. And you and I know that there are going to be times in our life, those bends in the road, those crooked ways in our life, there are going to be those times where we're going to throw our hands up and say, why God? Why are you allowing this to happen? But here's the thing, what Solomon's trying to teach us, it's just like Job. If you know Job in the Bible, Job was a wonderful man. He was a good man. He was upright and just in the eyes of God. Yet in a short period of time, Job lost his family. He lost his funds. He lost his health. And in a very serious moment of time in his life, his wife comes to him and she tells him to curse God and get it over with. So he also loses his wife. But in response to her, he says in Job 2:10, he says, shall we indeed accept good from God and shall we not speak foolish? You know what Job was saying there? He was saying that we need to accept adversity in our life. We need to accept the good things in life, and we need to accept the bad things in life. Now that's wisdom to me. He goes on to say, in all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. We rejoice when everything is good, and we're so thankful, but we can also learn from God how to be thankful in the midst of the storm, because God is there. I'll tell you the truth. And you may not believe this, or you may believe it. But this is what I said to the man Thursday. Because I remember this, because I wrote it down. I said, the truth is, God is never closer to us than what He is when we're going through times like this. If we know God as our Savior, it's in times like this. David Jeremiah was asked, as he was going through cancer, and he was very sick, he was asked by one of his congregation, member of his congregation, he was asked, after a service, he said, they came up to him and they said, Pastor, how can you have cancer? You're one of the finest men. You're a man of God. How can you have cancer? And I'll never forget this answer. David Jeremiah looked at her and he said, I am a man of God, but I'm still human. And what you go through, I have to go through. Maybe not to the extreme of cancer, but we are all human. And we're going to face life's straight roads, and we're going to face life's bending roads. And that's what he said. And he said that it was during that time that he felt God closer to him than any other time in his life. We can rejoice when everything's going good in our lives. The question is, can you rejoice when things are going bad, when adversity is in our way. Let me ask you this. What would happen to us if God just gave us blessings over and over in our lives, and we never, ever experienced anything tough? What would we be like? Some of you probably sitting there going, "Oh, I would rejoice, Pastor." You go through that. I'm going to tell you something. We would be so bent over that all we would look at is blessings. And we never look up from where those blessings came from. It's the bends in the roads that straighten us back up, so our eyes can be fixed on the one who is blessing us. My dad told me years ago, when our church was facing a major situation, God led it on my heart to have my dad come in and preach that Sunday. And he preached this sermon. There's times that God puts you in the valleys, so all you can do is look up to the mountaintop. You're in the valley, but there's a mountaintop waiting. And when you're in the valley, you can look and say, that's where I want to be. And your eyes are fixed on God for those times. Let me give you this, and I close. The third thing is this, and we're going to end with this, Trevor. Wisdom helps us to deal with the puzzles of life. You know, life is full of puzzles. Every day there's a puzzle, things that you can't figure out. We need God's wisdom daily to find those pieces in building the big picture. How many of you in here like to put puzzles together? That's good. You're sick. I don't have the patience to put puzzles together. But how many of you, we know that putting a puzzle together, it's easy putting all the sides together. And that's what we usually start with, don't we? We put those sides together because that's the easy. I know that's where I start with, and that's usually where I end. And I said, isn't this beautiful? What is it supposed to look like? I don't know. But all I know is its border looks really good. And that's where we are. That's the puzzles of life. On a daily basis, it's easy. Those outer section of the puzzle is those things when we're on the mountaintop. And they're a lot easier to handle. They're a lot easier to put together. They're a lot easier to figure out. But all the middle of that puzzle is like those valleys that we face, those crooked roads in our life where we can't figure things out. And it takes us a little bit more time, and we have to have a little bit more patience in dealing with all of it. That's where it goes. So here's where it is. Puzzle number 1 is verse 15. Notice what he says here. I have seen everything in my days of vanity or of emptiness. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. Now here's the thing that you got to keep in mind, and I know in my lifetime, I've heard this many times, why people say this: why do the wicked prosper while the righteous suffer? And I hear that. And Solomon says he wants us to know that we're only looking at the outside of this puzzle. That we must go get beneath the surface of this in order to understand what God's up to. And in fact, we are never able to do that in this life. But listen to what chapter 11, verse 15 says of Ecclesiastes. As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her with child. Now watch this. So you don't know the works of God who makes everything. You know what I said to that gentleman the other day at the hospital? I brought that verse up because, man, that was like, bam. It's like I had a V8. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? That is so true. How many of you believe that a birth of a child is a great miracle of God? Oh, beautiful. I look at my grandchild all the time. I look down how beautiful he is. How can this, so beautiful, live 9 months in another human being? And then I looked at Solomon's words. How can we ever figure out how bones grow inside of another person's bones? We can't. We just accept it as a miracle. Amen? We accept it as a miracle. And Solomon says, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. There's just times, and I say this in closing, there's just times we just need to look up. And we just need to say, God, I don't know how you did it. I don't know what you're up to. I don't know what you're going to do with this. I don't know what you want to teach me. I'm here. Teach me whatever. But I know it's you. I know you're behind this. And I'm just going to watch. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to put one piece of puzzle at a time inside of the depth of God, His wisdom. That's where you and I need to get to. And Solomon's saying, quit trying to figure out everything. Just let God be God. And you. Let's bow our heads.